Chapter 556. Discriminatory Treatment. A question? This strange radio transceiver is a little interesting. Danitz cleared his throat. You can ask, but I might not answer. Hee. You think I'm the kind of adventurer or archaeologist who ends up killing himself because of curiosity? Danitz thought with both caution and pride. It took a few seconds for the radio transceiver to produce its clickety-clack again. An illusory piece of white paper was spat out with red words on it. Do you have a secret crush on your captain? No. Don't speak nonsense. Who told you that? Danitz's face instantly reddened. He felt at a loss to have the secret that had been buried deep in his heart for so many years revealed so suddenly. He was embarrassed and ashamed at the same time and subconsciously wanted to deny it. But at the same time, he was also shocked and confused as to how this matter had been discovered by an outsider. He had never told anyone, and he had kept this secret very well hidden. Danitz opened his mouth, forced a smile, and said, What a silly question, I refuse to answer. The radio transceiver produced its clickety-clack and spat out more white paper. Then let's change the question. If you really don't like her, who can endure such dry and boring lessons? Isn't that right? No. It's because I'm not strong enough to beat her. Danitz blurted out. His expression twisted. The clacking of the radio transceiver became increasingly brisker and the words on the illusory white paper increased. A lie. Let's change the question. The type of female you like is beautiful, powerful, mysterious, intelligent, and someone who is able to step over you, right? Danitz's lips quivered as he felt as though flames were seemingly rising from his body and smoke was billowing from his head. At this moment, he felt his state of mind explode. It was as if someone had stripped him naked and tossed him into a busy street. Subconsciously, he looked around in panic, searching and avoiding the gazes that might be cast on him. Then, he saw that the bedroom door had opened at some point. Gehrman Sparrow stood there quietly in his white shirt which hadn't been tucked in and his rather loose black trousers. It was unknown how long he had been watching. When did you come out? Danitz stuttered, his face blank. Please tell me that you just opened the door. He prayed inwardly. Klein walked over to the radio receiver that had become paranormal and answered calmly. From the beginning. As a seer, how could I not have sensed the strange activity outside? Even in my sleep, I'll still have my spiritual intuition. Klein chuckled inwardly. Danitz's face instantly turned ashen. He turned his body in a half-circle and rushed toward the radio transceiver that seemed to be possessed by an evil spirit, in a bid to rip up the illusory white paper with the 3 questions. But his hand went through the words without him grabbing onto anything. A scarlet-red fireball formed in his palm again as he thought of blowing up the damn radio transceiver. At this moment, Gehrman Sparrow's cold gaze swept over him. Right, this is his. Danitz froze, looking at Gehrman Sparrow step past him and stop in front of the unusual radio transceiver. A Rhodes. How did it connect to this radio transceiver? It said it sensed a familiar but unique aura which is about to dissipate. Is it referring to the aura of the mysterious space above the gray fog? This radio transceiver was placed above the gray fog for a few days. Although it didn't show any abnormal signs, it still came into contact with the aura. And because of its own functions, it temporarily received information from the spirit world, and this was subsequently discovered by a Rhodes, the magic mirror, that seems to know a lot? Wait, what kind of question was that? I'm Gehrman Sparrow. I'm a cold, crazy adventurer. I'm a professional. I can't laugh out loud. Klein suppressed the corners of his mouth and secretly took a deep breath. Danitz stole a sidewards glance, like a prisoner by the gallows waiting for the noose to be released. Seeing no change in expression from Gehrman Sparrow, he was slightly relieved. He was glad that the person who had watched from the side was a madman and not a normal human being. He wouldn't have any interest in such matters. If it were any other pirate, I would be too embarrassed to return to the Golden Dream. No, I would be too embarrassed to adventure out at sea. He looked with hatred and fear at the radio transceiver, at the demon who called itself a Rhodes. He heard the clacking again and saw a new piece of white paper spit out from the radio transceiver. There were 2 neat lines in Loanese. Your loyal and humble servant, a Rhodes, is honored to follow in your footsteps once again, constantly at your service. This isn't the same evil spirit as that a Rhodes from before, right? Danitz's face twitched, and he suddenly felt that whatever happened tonight was surreal. Klein, who went through great difficulty to stifle his laughter, keenly caught on to a problem. Rhodes wasn't here in person and had likely used the spirit world and the radio transceiver's special function to send messages remotely. Therefore, when Danitz refused to answer the first question, it was powerless to punish him and could only ask another question. That's interesting. In the future, I'll just need to place the radio transceiver above the gray fog for prolonged periods of time, and I'll be able to make it turn into a unique item that receives spirit world information from ghosts. Unfortunately, by the law of conservation of beyonder characteristic, even with the augmentation of the gray fog's aura, its extraordinary abilities would dissipate bit by bit, eventually returning to normal. Yes, to maintain an ordinary item's extraordinary traits without the use of beyonder characteristics, there's another method according to my knowledge in mysticism. That is to carve the honorific name or true name of an angel, or even a deity in a language that can stir the powers of nature onto it. This would be equivalent to borrowing the target's mysticism and power. Of course, the premise is that they agree. I can't do it myself. At least, the piece of paper that I previously used as my bank's passcode in ancient Hermes hasn't undergone any abnormal changes. For real deities, I only know the true name of one. Primordial Demonis Cheek. If I get her honorific name, together with her true name, what will happen when I engrave them in ancient Hermes onto the radio transceiver? Will it release viruses? Will it appear more aesthetically pleasing in an industrial sense, mesmerizing those with fetishes? Yeah, the outcome with the greatest possibility is that when carving the honorific name and true name, the powers of the primordial demonis will descend, sucking everything dry. This is an extremely precise supernatural direction. Strange thoughts flashed through Klein's mind until Rhodes greeted him. Perfect. This is a magic mirror that can answer questions. Klein's heart skipped a beat. He turned his head to the side and said to Danitz, "Go out and guard the door." All right. Without any hesitation, Danitz rushed to the door. He was afraid that the demon named Rhodes would ask him new questions. When Danitz entered the corridor and closed the door behind him, Klein turned to the radio transceiver which was connected to the magic mirror, Rhodes, and said in a low voice, "I have some questions." "This is my honor. Can I address you as master? The great existence above the spirit world?" White paper spat out of the radio transceiver amid clacking sounds. "You're too obsequious and too shameless. Why do I have a nagging feeling that there's a problem?" Klein pondered a little and said, "You can use any form to address me." "Yes, master." Rhodes used an exclamation mark. "What's your question? Where can I find mermaids?" Klein asked directly. Amid clacking sounds, the radio transceiver answered, "To the east of the Gargas archipelago, sail the sea route for a week and there's a chance of meeting mermaids. However, the mermaids there are all believers of the Evernight goddess." This is a little amazing. It's within expectations, but it's also surprising. Klein realized that his previous speculation had turned into reality in a way he didn't expect. Rhodes continued to type. "If it bothers you, you can continue heading east, but it will be very dangerous. That place is no longer a real ocean, but the ruins of the War of the Gods. Of course, you definitely wouldn't mind that." "Who said that?" "I was still imagining that with the sea god's scepter, I would have the chance of entering even the most treacherous of seas. Now, you are telling me it's a sea evolved from the battlefield of gods. Indeed, there was a war of the gods in ancient times. The time when the creator reclaimed the ancient gods' authorities?" Klein didn't make comment as he watched Rhodes make the radio transceiver produce more words. In addition, there are reared mermaids in the Church of Evernight's headquarters, in the Cathedral of Serenity, as well as the Sleep Cathedral on Dinos Island. In addition to the Holy Cathedral, there are mermaids on Dinos Island as well? The former is too dangerous. They have grade 0 sealed artifacts and powerhouses at the level of angels. The latter can be considered. Transform into a nighthawk or a bishop and sneak in to listen to the singing and consume the potion. That's not right. The church rears mermaids to target faceless beyonders, so how can they not be on guard against this point? I have to think of another way. Klein was about to ask the second question when he saw a new sheet of white paper come out of the radio transceiver. "Great master, I must abide by certain rules. You must answer a question of mine in exchange." "Answer your question?" Klein raised his eyebrows slightly and waited for Rhodes to ask the question. He decided to acknowledge this servant depending on the situation. Amidst the clacking, Rhodes used words to spell out a question. "What are you planning to have for breakfast today?" "Nice question. Klein calmly replied, "Depends on what the inn offers." A perfect answer. Rhodes was almost short of giving a round of applause. Without waiting for Klein to speak, it continued to type. "The aura above the spirit world is about to disappear. I await the next opportunity to be at your service, Great Master." After the illusory piece of paper was spat out, the radio transceiver stopped and lost its gloomy feel. How many days would it take above the gray fog before I can contact Rhodes again? I'll ask it for the method to remove the mental corruption of a beyonder characteristic the next time. Yes, this method should be used prudently. Rhodes can use the special connection after the radio transceiver is tainted by the aura. Those who are stronger and more terrifying than it might be capable of doing so as well. If I keep doing this, maybe one day I'll get a telegram from the true creator or the primordial demoness. Klein's mind raced as he noticed the hidden risks. Chapter 557. Planting a queue on herself. Eastchester County, the Hall family manor. Audrey sat at the dressing table and lit a candle. Afterwards, she looked at herself in the mirror across from the slightly swaying light of the fire. Her green eyes gradually became deep, making it impossible for anyone who laid eyes on them to shift their eyes away, as if even their souls wished to drown in them. "Audrey, you have to remain lucid tonight in the dream," she said to herself softly. This was a simple, psychological cue. The ancient folk song she had heard at dusk had inspired her to explore her dreams and see if she could enter the sea of subconscious sea and the spiritual skies of all living things. This was an experiment that other psychiatrists had never attempted. At least, there was no similar experiences in the reference materials provided by the psychology alchemists, giving oneself a psychological cue to explore their own dreams. Perhaps I might be able to find traces of a mind dragon or even the City of Miracles, live seed. Audrey withdrew her gaze, removed Lie, which was now in the form of a ruby necklace, and placed it inside a jewelry box. She was afraid that the mystical item that amplified her emotions would affect her while in her dream and cause unnecessary harm. Therefore, she removed it in advance out of caution. After doing all of this, Audrey subconsciously looked at her reflection in the mirror and saw little blemishes on her face. While wearing Lie, she felt that her beauty was intoxicating. "Wake up, Audrey. That's only a lie." She lifted her right palm and caressed her cheek. At that moment, she was very glad that she had chosen the name Lie for that mystical item. It kept her constantly alert. Otherwise, she feared the day that she would one day be completely dependent on it and not want to face her true self. The day she lost it, it would be very possible that she would lose control. Those girls who are relatively ordinary-looking might never wish to take it off again after wearing Lie to perfect their looks. They might be willing to die to keep it on them. For a beyonder, I can't have such a state of mind either. Audrey sighed and stood up. She walked briskly and expectantly through the warm room in her slippery silk robe, back to the soft, comfortable and springy bed, and pulled a rope from the headboard. Her personal maidservant, Annie, entered and gently extinguished the lights. Before long, Audrey fell asleep. In the hazy world, she suddenly jolted to her senses and realized that she was dreaming. She looked around with interest and silently said to herself, "Is this what's known as lucid dreams in psychology? In mysticism, there is a similar concept. It's really effective. I relied on a simple psychological cue that I planted in myself to get a lucid dream." "Audrey, you really are a genius." No, this is mainly an application of a beyonder power. I mustn't be arrogant." At this moment, Audrey had already figured out what the current dream was. She was walking along a dark narrow road surrounded by a dark forest, and ahead of her was the castle with its spires. The prolonged howls of the wolves, the slow and frightening gasps, and the shrill and intermittent screams came from every direction, creating a dangerous and depressing atmosphere. I haven't gotten over the fear of Duke Negan's assassination. I'm still afraid that one day, many beyonders would suddenly attack my father, my mother, and my brothers. Audrey dissected her dreams from the point of view of a psychiatrist. In this strangely real dream, she walked slowly toward the castle that was almost identical to the Hall family's ancestral house. As she walked, a figure suddenly jumped out of the dark forest. It was a gigantic dragon with golden scales all over its body. Its eyes were pale gold with vertical pupils, and its thick tail looked like it could sweep away everything. This dragon's facial features were exactly the same as Audrey's. When paired with its body, it gave off an indescribable feeling of strangeness and horror. Audrey jumped in fright, almost waking up from her dream. Fortunately, having been a spectator before, She was able to stabilize her emotions in time. This made her realize that she had never really forgotten how she had almost lost control back when she consumed the psychiatrist potion. Back then, her self-relief and the improvement in her mood was only superficial. The trauma had already taken root in the depths of her subconscious and would occasionally reflect itself in her dreams. Fortunately, I discovered this today. In the future, I can try to treat this trauma in my subconscious. I'm a psychiatrist. If I continue to ignore this issue, I might lose control due to this fear when advancing to sequence 6. Audrey examined herself carefully. As she walked and stopped, Audrey's dream kept changing in an erratic fashion. It would have been considered quite an unsatisfactory story. Finally, she arrived in front of the castle and saw an arm-length magic staff sweeping through the air, scattering down specks of light that were as resplendent as starlight. The castle that was shrouded in the light instantly became magnificent, and all the gloom disappeared. The melody of a band came out from inside the castle as one wall lamp after another lit up. This was the most beautiful expectation that I had towards Beyond Our Powers at the very beginning. It really was a little girl's fantasy. The corners of Audrey's mouth curled up, and her mood turned for the better. She didn't stop, but she walked past the castle to the edge of her dream. She didn't care how the scene behind her changed, or how the story unfolded. After walking for an unknown amount of time, she passed through the barren wasteland and arrived at the top of a cliff. Looking out, the gray, blurry void extended into the distance. The area beneath her was so deep that it seemed to be bottomless. Audrey was keenly aware that this was the boundary of her dreams. Once she left, she had no idea what would happen. And how do I leave? Jump down? Will I fall to my death? Audrey thought awkwardly, not too courageous in taking the risk. After thinking for a few seconds, she slowly came up with an idea. This is a dreamland that originates from the world of my mind. As the mistress of this place, I can use my will to open up a path for myself. With the thought of making the attempt, she tried to conjure what she thought, just like the way she did it above the gray fog. The only difference was that the former needed the help of Mr. Fool, and now she had to rely on herself. Audrey stretched out her right hand, pointing it downwards into the depths of the gray fog. In front of her, the gray fog suddenly surged, revealing layers of stairs that led downwards, without an end in sight. Audrey took a slow breath, lifted her skirt slightly, and stepped onto the first step. Step by step, she continued down the stairs. The surroundings grew increasingly quiet, so quiet that it was almost as if she heard auditory hallucinations. In this place, there was nothing else apart from the gray fog. It was lonely and filled with the unknown. A howling gale blew in from different directions, causing Audrey to sway back and forth. The fear she felt slowly deepened. Before she lost control of her emotions, her green eyes shone with a warm light that seemed to be able to see through the hearts of others. Audrey used her psychoanalysis powers to placate herself. She continued her search. After nearly a minute, a point of light suddenly lit up in the surrounding gray fog. Audrey took a cautious look, only to see that the point of light was of herself, back when she had just consumed a potion and almost became a dragon monster. While on the verge of losing control, emotions such as worry, horror, fear, and nervousness were clearly overflowing from her. This is my subconscious, so this is my trauma? Audrey vaguely understood where she was after she left her dreamland. She was in no hurry to resolve this trauma as she continued to walk down, step by step, filled with anticipation. According to the theories of the psychology alchemists, the subconscious was at the bottom of her destination, the sea of collective subconscious for all living creatures. During her exploration, Audrey once again saw herself listening to her parents' storytelling when she was young. She saw herself, someone who valued her image but wasn't actually very elegant deep down. She saw herself participating in the tarot club, only that all the specks of light regarding the latter were tightly wrapped in a gray fog. These are things in my subconscious. They influence my character and behavior? Audrey instinctively analyzed what she saw with her knowledge of psychology. Amidst the coruscating points of light, there were several times where she was pushed to the verge of an emotional breakdown due to the lonely, aimless exploration, but she had used her beyond her powers to placate herself in time. Just as she was about to lose all sense of the passage of time, she saw the last step. In front of the steps was a solid, blurry gray ground. Above it, there were streams of light and shadows. They were dense and overlapping, like an illusory sea. The sea of collective subconscious. Audrey took a few steps forward and raised her head to look up. To her surprise, The gray fog no longer blocked her vision as the clear high skies appeared. There were countless indescribable silhouettes, 7 of which were of different colors. They were lustrous brilliances that seemed to possess immense knowledge. Audrey pursed her lips and happily said to herself, "The sky of spirituality." Then, she cautiously moved forward, forging the adventure that she could call her own. Those figures of light that formed the sea would flash past her from time to time. Some contained ancient memories of being burned by flames, while others bore the excruciating pain of seeing something indescribable. Apart from the imprints of the ancients from ancient times, Audrey also saw the gazes of admiration cast on her one after another, as well as the activities of the people who worshipped dragons. As she walked, she noticed a grayish-white mountain on the far left. It extended upwards until it emerged from the sea of light and shadows. The top of the mountain was shrouded in a dense fog, making the entire place seem hazy. Is that someone else's consciousness? The sea is the subconscious, and beyond the surface of the sea is the ordinary consciousness? Yes, he's dreaming. Audrey suddenly thought of a possible application of a psychiatrist. It was to move closer and climb up, directly affecting the other party's subconscious thoughts, allowing them to naturally act according to her bidding. But it should be very difficult and very dangerous. Audrey looked away, not daring to make the attempt. She clearly remembered that her purpose this time was to seek out traces of the Mind Dragon and the City of Miracles, Liveseed. Audrey passed by more than 100 other people's consciousness. Gradually, she felt exhausted. It's time to return. Instinctively, she raised her head and looked into the distance, rationally making the decision. She stood there for a long time, unwilling to leave. A shadow suddenly appeared in the air just as Audrey was about to turn around. It was a pair of 2 huge gray wings. Under the wings, there was a long lizard-like monster. Its entire body was covered with huge scales that were like grayish-white stone slabs. It had 4 thick and powerful legs, seemingly bathing in the sunlight that didn't exist as it flickered in what seemed like the afterglow of the setting sun. The monster flew over. Its eyes were pale gold with its pupils vertical, looking cold and arrogant. Its grand and epic figure quickly disappeared into the sea of the subconscious of all living beings. Dragon. A mind dragon. Audrey jumped on the spot and looked around, afraid of others noticing her inelegant behavior. She paced around excitedly, feeling very satisfied with her adventure. Indeed, the tradition of dragon worship here isn't without an origin. In their subconscious, there lives a mind dragon. Audrey resisted the urge to praise herself and had decided to return immediately and wake up from the dream. She didn't have the urge to continue her exploration, as she wasn't prepared for it at all. She was going to consult Mr. Fool, Mr. Hanged Man, and the others at the Tarot Club next week in the hope of receiving some advice. Audrey returned the way she came, entering the mountain formed by her consciousness. Then, she woke herself up and successfully escaped from the dream. At that moment, Danitz was also permitted to return to his room. He glanced at Gehrman Sparrow and said with an embarrassed smile, "You won't tell anyone what you just saw, will you?" Chapter 558. Search for abnormalities. Klein didn't answer with yes or no. Instead, he stopped walking towards his bedroom and flatly said, "That was a question." Right, a question. That was a slanderous question with no basis. Besides, I also gave a negative answer. Danitz responded with delight and had emphasized that he had never admitted to it. Klein gently nodded his head. "I will clarify this with your captain." Clarify. Danitz stared. Then he half opened his mouth, his expression twisted. He was also considered a somewhat knowledgeable person, so he stopped explaining and arguing, and he forced a smile. "Is there anything I can do for you?" Klein took a deep breath and used his clown powers to control his facial expression. "Monitor it well." "Yes, all right." Danitz quickly agreed. Seeing Gehrman Sparrow turn around and walk to the bedroom's entrance, he couldn't help but ask, "You're not going to clarify this with Captain, right?" Klein twisted the handle and replied expressionlessly, "Monitor it well." After he finished speaking, he pushed open the door and entered the room. Before he could widen his mouth into a laugh, he closed the door behind him. The next morning, after breakfast, Klein put on a pair of pantaloons, a thick brown jacket, and a cap. He changed his appearance and went out, leaving Danitz alone in the room to watch the radio transceiver. Along the way, Klein changed his appearance again, making himself look more like a native. He found a special store, bought a pair of linen gloves, a shroud, and a body bag. Then, according to the surroundings he had previously witnessed, he scanned the area around him for landmarks before finding the bridge and the girl who had died amid the mud in a corner. As it was still winter, the weather wasn't too hot, and there were no obvious signs of decay from the corpse, but the festering skin and the stench still made Klein instinctively nauseous. He didn't immediately come to bury the girl who wanted to live like a human being last night, due to the recent events. Byam was under strict curfews at night, as well as the fact that the cemetery didn't open until dawn. Pulling out a small metal bottle, Klein poured some quelaag oil onto his hand and rubbed it at the tip of his nose. A choking sensation invaded his mind. The smell of peppermint mixed with disinfectant filled his olfactory senses, making him sober as if he had just fallen into a sea of floating ice. He was no longer affected by any other smells. Putting away the metal bottle, Klein put on his gloves, took a few steps forward, and crouched next to the female corpse. He unwrapped the shroud and began to gently move the corpse into the body bag. Carrying the bag over his shoulder, he deliberately walked through the most bustling streets of Byam until he reached the outskirts of the city. Along the narrow road where horse carriages couldn't pass, he scaled a mountain to its mountainside. There was a cemetery specially prepared by the Church of Storms and the Governor-General's office, for the natives. As for foreigners, such as businessmen, adventurers, people from Lone, Intis and Fainapotter, who had settled down here, they had their cemeteries situated on the opposite side of Byam on a flat and soothing plain with forests backing them. Klein climbed higher and higher and entered the unnamed cemetery, where he found the gravekeeper dozing off. "How do you want to bury him?" The gravekeeper pointed at the body bag. "If you want to do it for free, you have to wait a few days until the corpses in the morgue accumulate to a certain amount. Then they'll be cremated together and buried in the same grave. Of course, there will be priests who will do a send-off for the souls of the dead in advance. 5 soli and he will have an urn and a niche he can call his own. 2 pounds, he'll get an urn and a grave with a tombstone. If you don't want him cremated, you'll need a coffin. You can pick one over there. They're priced differently based on the type of wood." Klein thought for a moment. Then he took out 5 soli in notes and handed them over. "What's his name?" The gravekeeper counted the notes, picked up a fountain pen, and asked with a good attitude. He didn't actually know how to write words. He just wanted to draw symbols to help him remember. Klein paused for a second and said, "Bordy. Bordy." The gravekeeper repeated it in a low voice and drew a symbol. Without looking up, he continued, "She can have an epitaph on the niche." Bordy was a typical female name in the Rorstad archipelago. Therefore, the gravekeeper no longer mistook her gender. Klein remained silent for a few seconds, then he said in a low voice, "She is a human being." "She is a human being? What a strange epitaph," the gravekeeper muttered. "Do you have a picture? I know you don't." Before he could finish his words, he saw the other party hand over a photo. It was a portrait that Klein had drawn using a ritual. It perfectly reproduced the girl's looks before she fell ill. In order to not be suspected, he used the corresponding type of paper and some technique to make the portrait look like a real photograph. The gravekeeper was surprised but didn't say anything. He quickly took the information and carried the body bag to the hut where the priests resided with Klein. After the send-off and cremation, as well as the storing of ashes into an urn, the photograph was pasted on, and an epitaph was engraved, putting an end to the entire matter. Klein took a deep look before turning around to leave the cemetery. As he walked down the mountain path, he saw Byam in its entirety. The sea was pale blue, nearing the color of green. It was empty as far as the eye could see. Sails were stacked by the harbor, and the chimneys towered high. The streets were crisscrossed as people came and went. The surrounding estates were densely packed, and there was plenty of greenery. The distant public roads were wide, and the railways were straight. It was like a beautiful oil painting that was produced by a master. It was filled with vitality that was hardly describable. At the top of the clock tower of the Cathedral of Waves, the Church of Storms Cardinal, high-ranking deacon of the mandated punishers, John Cotman, stood at the edge, looking out over the refreshing sea and the mountain range that stretched out along the coastline. The pollution in Byam was rather low as the mining and smelting industries were located in other cities on the island. The mainstay here was the spice trade, the brothels and casinos, and the accumulation and transit of goods. It lacked a fully formed industry, and there was a limited number of days needed for coal to be burned for heat. As soon as Sea King John Cotman retracted his gaze, he saw a mandated punisher running up the spiral staircase. "Your Eminence, there's new information." The mandated punisher struck the left side of his chest with his right hand. "What is it?" The well-built John Cotman turned around and asked. The mandated punisher handed over the piece of paper in his hand. "News from within the resistance. They've received a response from Calvetua. They're in the process of creating new statues." New statues. John Cotman unfolded the note and skimmed through it. He then turned his head to the interior of Blue Mountain Island, which was covered in a sea of dense forests. After a moment of thought, he said, "Search for abnormalities in the archipelago's sea area." He was certain of one thing from the intelligence, that the mysterious person who had taken away the characteristic left by Calvetua hadn't left the waters of the Rorstad archipelago. This could be determined from the fact that the person could disguise himself as Calvetua and reply to his followers. Meanwhile, John Cotman knew very well that the beyonder characteristic left behind by Calvetua, who had gone mad before its death, would lead to severe side effects regardless of whether or not it was reduced to a real item. Therefore, it would definitely result in an abnormality in the surrounding area. Moreover, he believed that it wouldn't be easy for the mysterious person to find a proper sealing method. Even if he had found it, there was no way he could control the effects when responding, hence, exposing the problem. This was the clue. "Yes, Your Eminence, may the storm be with you." The mandated punisher bowed again. After entering Byam City, Klein dispelled his faceless power when no one was paying attention. He returned to the Wind of Azure in via carriage. As soon as he opened the door and entered, he saw Danet sitting in front of the radio transceiver, his expression strange and grave. "Got something?" Klein asked in a low voice. No. Danitz raised his right palm and shook the papers in his hand. "My bounty. My bounty has been raised to 5,500 pounds. This was almost reaching Steele Mavadi's bounty. Because of this, he didn't dare head out to drink or relax. All he could do was stay in the room and listen out for a signal. This rate of appreciation is really tempting." For a moment Klein didn't know how to react, so he said without expression, "This is just the beginning. Mr. 10,000 pounds. Dog's hit." Danitz cursed inwardly, but he didn't dare to show any disrespect on his face. "All of those things were done by Gairman Sparrow. Why did it end up increasing my bounty? Those sons of bitches from the Church of Storms." He forced a smile and shook his head, his facial muscles twitching slightly. Klein held back his laughter and ignored him. He went back to his bedroom to catch up on his sleep. At this moment, he saw a letter suddenly appear, floating down from midair and landing right in front of him. Klein raised his right hand and grabbed the letter. The messenger didn't even show its face and just left after throwing the letter? Klein clicked his tongue, opened the letter, and read it. There were two methods for obtaining a messenger. The first method is to think of an accurate description, hold a ritual, summon the corresponding spirit world creature, and make a contract with it. The second method is to directly enter the spirit world and search for a messenger that you wish to obtain. After obtaining its consent, sign a contract with it and then record down the accurate description language for later use. The first method is relatively simple, but it is also rather dangerous, because what fits the description might be a powerful spirit world creature or a strange evil spirit. Every time you summon it, you cannot be completely sure what you will attract, and this is a risk that is hard to divine in advance. The danger of the second method is that it isn't easy to find the appropriate messenger, and there's a risk of getting lost in the spirit world. Unless you're a traveler. Otherwise, I do not suggest the second method. For the first method, I can provide you a description that has been tested and verified. As long as the process is done accurately, the level of danger will be rather low. But it might not satisfy you. Also, the contract needs to use powers in the undead domain. You can use my copper whistle to provide for that. The format includes the following paragraphs. Of course, if you don't mind, I can transfer a messenger to you as a gift and have it sign a contract with you. Transfer it to me as a gift? It's no wonder that the messenger didn't even dare show its face. Klein thought in enlightenment. Considering that he had used the previous messenger as a shield and was unfortunately finished off by Mr. A, causing the later messengers to become increasingly rude to him, he inwardly declined the offer. Use the first or second method. The first method is prone to error. I might even summon a candidate messenger and get beaten up. A commonly used description isn't unique enough, making the messenger's strength worrying. The second method? I'm not afraid of getting lost since I'm able to instantly return above the gray fog. Furthermore, in my spirit body state, I can use the sea god scepter. The spirit world creatures aren't afraid of having their blood drained either. Yes, I have to do it outside the archipelago. Otherwise, I'll be affected by the prayers. Klein quickly came to a decision. Chapter 559. Meeting on the way with that idea in mind, Klein immediately began making preparations. It was to explore the spirit world and select a suitable target to become a messenger. After he left the Rørsted archipelago and its surrounding sea, he could bring the sea god scepter along with him to reason with the target and convince them to become his messenger. Once I find myself lost or in a dangerous situation, I would immediately halt the summoning and return above the grey fog. There's basically no risk. Klein thought for a few seconds, then he locked the door and began the ritual of summoning himself. At the end of the ritual, he quickly arrived above the grey fog, but he was in no hurry to respond to himself. Instead, he sat down and let the sea god scepter fly out from the junk pile and land on his palm. He intended to scan the prayers of the believers as per routine for anything to respond to. During this process, Klein discovered that some of the prayers were actually quite interesting, because humans could deceive friends and relatives, but it was difficult to keep their truest thoughts when confessing or praying to the gods. At most, they would modify the truth to make them look less bad. A mixed blood, who had clearly changed his faith to the Lord of Storms, had already reached the middle ranks of the Bayern police department, but in his confession, he tried hard to portray his behavior as a plan of burdening himself to carry out a mission. For the sake of a brighter future for his kinsman, he could only confess to God in misery, hoping that he would protect him, so that he could climb up the ranks in the police system as a believer of the Lord of Storms. Although his words sounded flawless, the fluctuations in his thoughts and emotions during his confession were clearly displayed in the prayer scene. It was something that couldn't be hidden. Trying to deceive God while you are deceiving yourself. If it were a gigantic sea serpent like Calvetua who lacked intelligence, it might have believed you. Should I give him a lightning bolt or 10 wind blades? Yes, it's pretty impressive to have a mixed blood rise up to the ranks of senior inspector. I'll keep him. There are benefits to having a snitch. Klein raised his sea god's staff, making one of the blue gems glow. The light poured into the scene and imperceptibly seeped into the senior inspector named Belaya. This wasn't a curse, nor was it a cue. It was a mark of divinity that almost no one could discover. Simply put, it's a unilateral way for me to keep tabs on you. Klein silently added inwardly. He continued browsing and saw a young believer with slightly curly bronze hair praying for a man named Zongma to be caught in a storm and buried at sea. He claimed that Zongma wasn't pious enough, but the truth was that, as a competing fisherman, Zongma was always able to harvest more fish than he did. What kind of nonsense prayers are these? The human heart sure is hard to fathom. Klein frowned and mumbled to himself. Then he had a vague idea. For a faceless to engage in real acting, it not only requires a flawless performance in terms of external appearances and habitual actions, but it also needs to maintain the core personality. Not many changes are allowed. As for personality, every person is different, so there must be a difference to a certain degree. By browsing the prayers of my believers, it's equivalent to me realizing different kinds of personalities and mental states without going through the trouble. When talking about the many masks we wear, it's not only about looks. This will be rather important for my subsequent acting as a faceless. It can save me time from figuring things out through accumulated experiences. Klein increasingly felt that acting as sea god was very beneficial towards him. When you are acting the role of a demigod, even if you don't get any feedback, you will still definitely get some considerable benefits. This is a way of gaining experience of being someone of a higher level. Klein perked up, no longer being perfunctory about skimming through the prayer scenes. After quickly browsing through one scene after another, his gaze stopped at a merchant named Ralph. The businessman praised the miracle of the reappearance of the sea god, and he had indicated that he planned to offer a third of his fortune, worth £20,000, to the resistance, half for military expenses, and half for the reconstruction of God's statue. Actually, there's no need to go through all that trouble. Just directly offer it to me. Klein muttered half-jokingly. He thought for a moment, and then he conjured a background of waves and storms with heavy rain and lightning falling together. He responded in a low voice, "You have honored my name by helping your compatriots and companions. The young lambs need help, food, and education." He intended to get Ralph to set up a charity fund with the £20,000, and to seek donations widely from the community to make up for the damage, create a consensus, and help to provide local children with food, clothing, and education under the pretext of governance. As for the military expenditures of the resistance, Klein understood that in a world with beyonder powers, it was very difficult to rely solely on the opposition from the natives of the colony to succeed. Therefore, they needed the help of foreign countries like Faisak and Intis. Funding was undoubtedly needed. Unfortunately, it's not possible to add a line in the Ten Commandments about boldly and confidently seek funding. That would damage the image of Sea God. The resistance shouldn't be thinking about annihilating the garrison troops. They should just focus on destroying the transportation infrastructure and make it more difficult for the Governor-General's office to rule, so as to initiate talks. As a keyboard warrior, Klein wasn't lacking in ideas in such areas. He quickly restrained his wandering thoughts and made a divination to see if it was dangerous exploring the spirit world today. After obtaining the revelation that it wasn't considered dangerous, Klein took the Dark Emperor card, naturally changed his image, and stepped into the door of summoning. After entering the real world, he stuffed the mystical items he needed into his body as a precaution. Then, like last time, he used cogitation to sense the spirit world. Taking a step forward, he passed through an invisible curtain as Klein's illusory figure floated up. Around him, red, yellow, blue, green, and other colors were superimposed, like they were like the most abstract oil painting ever. The concept of direction that humans were used to could no longer be used here. If one used the old means of distinguishing direction and one's location, they would definitely find themselves lost. Klein roamed carefully and casually, sometimes seeing a yellow sun like a child's sketch, sometimes brushing past an incorporeal river that flowed quietly. There was also a flat woman with her upper body naked and a face resembling a smiling moon, a canoe with its end upturned, a tangled ball of thread, and a serpentine staircase leading to the 7 pure lights. In this extremely chaotic world, other than spirit world creatures, all kinds of information existed as abstract symbols. Thus, what one received from a divination process would only be a revelation that required one to interpret it on their own. As for those symbols, there was a chance that they would come to life and become incorporeal monsters. This was the spirit world that couldn't be understood and viewed with common human knowledge. The last time he came in, he had easily discovered spirit world creatures, and he had noticed the creepy gazes from unknown locations that made his hair stand on end. There was the headless woman who carried 4 heads, a round eye with clear blacks and whites, and a giant jellyfish with a skull attached to each tentacle. He had easily encountered all of them back then. But this time, he failed to see a single spirit world creature despite roaming for so long. Even the indescribable figures in the distance had disappeared, as if they had hidden themselves. It can't be that you're afraid of being my messenger, can it? Yes, I entered the spirit world in the form of a soul body. Perhaps the thoughts in my mind will appear in a special formless manner here, turning into hidden symbols that interact with the spirit world. This then naturally affects my path options? Klein was puzzled, but he couldn't find the reason. All sorts of thoughts flashed through his mind when his body suddenly sank down and he fell freely. After a while, Klein could only see the vivid superposition of the colors and the various symbols that took physical form. What's going on? He began to consider whether he should write to Mr. Azik and ask him about it, or to throw the radio transceiver above the gray fog and get it tainted with the aura, so that he could contact the magic mirror, Rhodes. While floating, Klein's heart suddenly palpitated as he quickly dodged to the side. A tinge of yellow and green flashed across his eyes as a giant foot that was large enough to squash his entire body landed, stepping into the interlaced red and blue color spots. Above the sole of the foot was a long, festering leg covered in a yellowish-green liquid. The leg was over 3 meters long, and above it was a huge body that was wrapped in corpse oil bandages. Amidst the solidified aura in the area, the 2 legs that were filled with yellow-green pus alternated as they rose up. Carrying a body that was difficult to discern, the legs quickly disappeared into the depths of the spirit world. Klein stood at a distance, not daring to make a sound. Finally, he confirmed that he was fine as he grimaced and thought, the spirit world is really scary. You can accidentally encounter a powerhouse just passing by. A powerhouse among the spirit world creatures? Klein shook his head and continued his search. At that moment, he had no idea where in the spirit world he had wandered to. After drifting for a while, he finally found some traces of spirit world creatures. Just as he was about to switch from flying forward to descending to his left, he was surprised to find that his body continued to move forward uncontrollably at an accelerating speed. In front of him, the chaotic superimposed colors and the grayish-white mist that filled the area suddenly split open, and a large purely black 3-masted sailboat leaped in. The boat was nearly 100 meters long, and 3 pitch-black sails were hanging high up like flags. On the left and right sides of the ship, there were cannon muzzles and all kinds of sailors were running around on the deck. All of this was so real, so substantial, and so out of place when it came to the spirit world as a whole. However, as the ship entered the spirit world, its black color quickly turned richer, tainting itself with an ethereal vibe. On its deck stood a mottled stone chair that was 2 to 3 meters high, its back facing the cabin. Leaning against the chair's back, a colossal figure that was comparable to an ancient giant sat there. He had a black beard that went just past his neck, and he wore a tall pointed crown on his head. He wore a gorgeous black robe with silver fringes. The wrinkles on his face looked hardened and filled with magnificence. It made one subconsciously wish to bow their heads. Under the slightly wrinkled forehead and on the high nose bridge, Klein's pitch-black full-body armor and black crown were reflected into those 2 dark red eyes. As for Klein, he was having trouble stopping his slow flight toward the giant. Their gazes met among the layers of colors and symbols in the spirit world, and then Klein disappeared. The giant on the mottled stone chair didn't withdraw his gaze as he continued staring over in a long silence. Chapter 560. The Hanged Man Gets Fleeced Above the Fog. Klein took out the Dark Emperor card that he had fused with his spirit body and instantly reverted to his original form. This is called a one-click gear swap. He mocked himself as he recalled what had just happened. He was almost certain that the giant, wearing the sharp crown, was king of the 5 seas, Nast Solomon. The 100-meter-long sailboat that could sail through the spirit world was the ghost ship named Dark Emperor, which was built by the ancient Solomon Empire. I've always thought that a ghost ship simply means that it can sail on its own and wouldn't sink, making it closer to a strange creature. I never thought that the most powerful ghost ship would be able to turn itself incorporeal and wander through the spirit world. That makes it almost a demigod, right? As expected of the most famous Dark Emperor on the 5 seas. Yes. I can't eliminate the possibility that it sacrificed a traveler during its creation process. For one of the most famous legendary treasures, the Spectre Empire, which carries the final inheritance of the Trunsoist Empire, could it be that the ship also comes equipped with this capability, making it impossible to find? Klein's thoughts slowly drifted without immediately realizing the reason why he had suddenly met King of the 5 Seas, Nast. This was very obvious. The law of convergence of Beyonder characteristics. Although the Dark Emperor card didn't contain any Beyonder characteristics, Roselle had added or carved something onto the card when he made it. It allowed the wielder to use the card of blasphemy after they advanced to a high-sequence Beyonder, to subtly sense the Beyonder ingredients that they needed. There was no doubt that such a sensation was mutual. As one sensed the other would naturally sense them too. As for the wielder, they would appear to approach a certain fate before they crossed that step into becoming a demigod. This was something Klein was deeply aware of. He ultimately suspected that the existence of the gray fog had brought together certain Beyonders or supernatural events to him. Traveling with the Dark Emperor card in the spirit world makes it easier for such situations to occur. This is because the real world needs to abide by many rules. Even the fate from drawing lots needs to abide by logic, developing bit by bit. It doesn't make sense for me to use the Dark Emperor card in Backlund, and for the King of the 5 Seas, Nast, to immediately appear in front of me with the ghost ship. Even if he sensed the attraction force, he would have to go through the process of locating me, and through the process of traveling through the spirit world, take hours or even days to arrive. If he didn't sense it, he would only naturally think of sailing towards the Sonia Sea and head closer to the borders of the Lone Kingdom. In that case, it might take months before we bump into each other. By being in the spirit world, things are simple. There is no concept of distance or direction in there. Locations and distances are all extremely chaotic. Perhaps the King of the 5 Seas, Nast, might have wished to go out on a spin in the spirit world, but he ended up seeing me pass by the moment he entered. This doesn't need to abide by any restrictions or limitations on geographical locations, Klein thought as he wrapped the corner of the mottled table. In addition to this, he was certain that the reason why he was thrown uncontrollably towards the Dark Emperor and at King of the 5 Seas, Nast, wasn't because of the law of convergence of Beyonder characteristics. The effects of the law was only reflected in fate, perception and desire, nothing too exaggerated. Otherwise, there wouldn't be high-sequence Beyonders. All of them would be involuntarily drawn by the uniqueness of their respective pathway. Klein could sense that it was a type of Beyonder power that twisted and strengthened his intent to move forward, resulting in him being unable to stop. This is a very simple analysis. Even if I had thrown out the Dark Emperor card at the time, I wouldn't have been able to stop. This is a lawyer, which is a beyonder power wielded by the Dark Emperor pathway. Klein leaned back in his chair and decided not to use the Dark Emperor card anytime soon. This meant that he was unable to roam the spirit world in search of a messenger. If he hadn't brought the Dark Emperor card and had used his main body with the Sea God scepter, he would appear in the spirit world, which was filled with all kinds of revelations and information. He would inevitably leave many clues and could be divined about at any time. In terms of anti-divination and anti-prophecy, Azek's copper whistle couldn't be compared to the Dark Emperor card. If I were to really do that, I might meet 10 people who know that I obtained the Sea God scepter when buying a beer at the bar. Of course, it was taken by Klein Moretti, so what has that got to do with me, Gehrman Sparrow? Klein shook his head in a self-deprecating manner and decided to use the ritual method to get a messenger to respond. He could find something more suitable later on. After he covered the Dark Emperor card, his figure disappeared from the mysterious space above the gray fog. Early morning. Byam. Alger prepared to take a carriage out of the city and take a detour to a private harbor behind the cliff. That was where his Blue Avenger was docked and waiting to set sail. As a disguised pirate captain, he couldn't dock so openly at the main port of the City of Generosity. That would be sufficient proof that he had close ties with the authorities. It was the same with the other pirates who had to consider their berth in advance before coming to Byam to sell their loot or gain enjoyment. They either went to a small port in the surrounding waters, or to a private port controlled by someone with a deep background or by the resistance. Finally, there are no more missions. I can go out to sea again. I need to first obtain a mystical item that can increase my strength and also square my accounts. After that, I'll head to the primitive island and hunt for the Blue Shadow Falcon, allowing me to advance to Sequence 6 as quickly as possible. Alger was about to walk towards a rental carriage when he unexpectedly saw a familiar figure. The former pirate merchant, Ralph, walked out of the carriage with a ruddy face and looked towards the Governor-General's office that wasn't far away. He seemed to be abnormally excited. What happened to him? After a moment of puzzlement, Alger took the initiative to go over and greet him. From his point of view, Ralph was, in a sense, also one of his comrades. They were all subordinates of Mr. Fool. However, one is a core member, while the other just remains on the periphery. Alger calmly confirmed their identities and positions. What happened to deserve such joy? Alger asked after chatting about the weather. Ralph laughed out loud and narrowed his eyes, saying, "If I were to say that I received the blessings of God, would you believe me?" "I believe," Alger answered in his mind without hesitation. Suppressing his curiosity, he asked, "What are you doing here?" Ralph was about to answer when his eyes suddenly lit up. He looked around, and after confirming that there was no one around him, he said in a deep voice, "Didn't you say that you also believe in God?" In order to befriend him, Alger had lied, saying that his faith lay with sea god, Calvetua. In any case, this was common among pirates, so it wouldn't arouse suspicion. At sea, the weather was usually more frightening than any enemy, so most pirates, adventurers, ship crew, and sailors had great respect for gods who controlled similar fields, believing in them to a certain extent. Of course. This time, Alger's answer was firmer than ever. This was because he knew that the sea god that the other party believed in was the embodiment of Mr. Fool. Ralph nodded in satisfaction, revealed a smile and whispered, "I received a revelation yesterday. God sent me to help his young lambs. I intend to establish a charitable fund for this purpose. This is the will of God. As his believer, I think you would be happy to provide some assistance." He held out his right hand and waited for the donation. Alger's expression stiffened, and he was momentarily unsure of how to respond. Although his present fortune was worth £3,245, he was preparing to buy a mystical item, making his overall financial situation somewhat tight. Of course, he could still donate quite a bit if he skimped and saved. If the sea god was still Calvetua, Alger, who claimed to be a believer, wouldn't have hesitated to find an excuse. But now, he had to seriously consider the deeper motives of Mr. Fool. Noticing Alger's reaction, Ralph's eyes darted schemingly before he said, "We want to help children who are suffering from unnecessary discrimination because of their bloodline. They live a hard life, and it is hard to see any hope for them. There are pure-blooded natives, as well as mixed bloods." Alger was silent for a few seconds. Then he pulled out a wad of cash. "Here's £100. Ralph took it and said with a smile, "Your kindness will definitely be rewarded. God will protect you." The door slanted over the entrance to the warehouse. Klein prepared the summoning ritual for the spirit world creature and was surrounded by the hallucinatory scent of herbs and essential oils. He was afraid that there would be some kind of accident if he held it in the inn, and although it might not be risky for him, it might end up harming the other occupants. Therefore, he went back to the abandoned warehouse where he had gave a sacrifice to Calvetua. As for Danitz, having his bounty raised to £5,500, he was very proactive in asking to stay in the suite and monitor the radio transceiver. The procedure is to light the candle that symbolizes me, and to use a verified incantation to summon the appropriate spirit world creature as a messenger. Daily Simone's 3-line description and the various incantations provided by Mr. Azik went through Klein's mind. When summoning a spirit world creature, the first sentence needed descriptions such as, wanders about the unfounded, and roaming in the upper realm. Only by doing so could it accurately point to the spirit world. The suffix would clearly indicate that the spirit body was being summoned, and that it was a creature that had a corporeal body. The second and third lines were an accurate description of the creature, but due to the restrictions of the format, one couldn't use too many words to pinpoint a creature. Therefore, it was difficult to predict or divine what would ultimately be summoned by the ritualist. In this sort of situation, using an incantation previously used by others implied a much lower risk. Then, after signing a contract, the description of the third sentence, the messenger that belongs to whomever, or contract companion of whoever, could be made, allowing the 3-line description to accurately summon the corresponding messenger. Yes, my messenger has to run very fast. Otherwise, it might be killed by some malicious creature in the spirit world, resulting in the loss of important letters. Klein's mind raced, and he came up with a clear plan. He took a step back and said in ancient Hermes, I summon in my name, the spirit that wanders about the unfounded, the friendly creature that can be subordinated, the creature whose speed surpasses imagination. Whoosh! There was the sound of wind, tainting the candles to a dark green and turning the surroundings cold and creepy. Klein saw a blurry figure rush out, too fast for him to see anything. After that, he couldn't find the fellow ever again. Chapter 561, Recruitment Fair. That's way too fast. Did it already circle the planet several times? Or maybe it's still there, but it's too fast for my vision to keep up. Klein's mouth twitched, deciding to wait a few seconds to see if the creature whose speed surpasses imagination would appear again. He wasn't worried that the summoned spirit world creature would harm the innocent, as one of the descriptions was of a friendly creature. Besides, as long as he forcefully ended the summoning and stopped the ritual, the creature would be immediately sent back to the spirit world, no matter where the creature whose speed surpasses imagination went. A few seconds later, Klein inhaled after failing to see any response from him waiting. He said with ancient Hermes, I end this summoning in my name. The chilling air around him instantly vanished as the swirling cold wind died down and the candle flames returned to their normal color. Klein stepped forward and extinguished the candle, intending to revise the last sentence and try again. As for the two phrases, the spirit that wanders about the unfounded, the friendly creature that can be subordinated, he had no intention of changing them. The first sentence was directed at the spirit world, and it could only be replaced with synonyms, so it didn't matter if he changed it or not. The second sentence was a prerequisite for Klein to ensure his own safety. Otherwise, it would have been a horror story instead of a hilarious one. I don't need to use surpasses imagination as an adjective. But others might not meet my needs. Perhaps I can change my train of thought. A messenger doesn't have to run that fast. A normal speed is fine. There are other ways to ensure safety. I just need to get malicious beings to ignore it and neglect it. I'll try a spirit world creature that's easily neglected. After 2 or 3 minutes of deliberation, Klein held a ritual again. When he was done with the preparations, he chanted a new incantation. I summon in my name, the spirit that wanders about the unfounded, the friendly creature that can be subordinated, the being who is easily neglected. The interior of the warehouse became abnormally quiet. There was no wind, nor did it turn cold within the wall of spirituality. Even the color of the candle remained unchanged. Klein waited, watching, hoping for a good messenger. After about 10 seconds, he sighed and looked around. There's nothing. The description was of no effect this time. He didn't wait any longer and followed the procedure of ending the summoning and extinguishing the candle. To his puzzlement, the candle flame even shook a few times in the end. Did I miss something? Klein frowned, and then he relaxed, throwing the matter to the back of his mind. He reconsidered the question of how to modify the description and continued targeting the third sentence. I'll switch to another train of thought. If a messenger is especially good at enduring scuffles and has great survivability, it's still okay. No matter what, a messenger that can deliver the letter to the target is a good messenger. Klein pondered for a moment, then he held the summoning ritual for the third time. Amidst the fragrance of herbs and essential oils, and under the dim light of the candlelight, the shadows on his face darted about as his mouth gaped open and closed. I summon in my name, the spirit that wanders about the unfounded, the friendly creature that can be subordinated, an extraordinary creature who has extremely high survivability. The flame of the candle flared and stretched, illuminating the bright red interior of the altar. In Klein's spirit vision, white bones drilled out from the ground, overlapping to form what looked like a safe. I've finally summoned something I can see. Furthermore, it's a creature with extremely high survivability. It looks very much like a safe. Just one look is enough to tell that it's good at taking a beating. Klein breathed a sigh of relief and spoke in the ancient Hermes. Are you willing to be my messenger? The skeletal creature that looked like a safe quickly indicated its willingness. Then it wriggled the bones beneath it and crawled toward Klein slowly, very slowly. It took 10 seconds to crawl a centimeter. This is way too slow. Klein's smile froze on his face. Although messengers completed their mission by traveling through the spirit world, that didn't mean that they didn't need speed. Within the spirit world, distance and orientation were chaotic. The most important thing was to find and lock onto a location. As long as an accurate, clear, immediate coordinates were provided, such as the summoning ritual just now or a simplified ritual that involved blowing a whistle, then no matter where the messenger was in the spirit world, it would immediately appear within the altar. When the location wasn't that immediate and only had a contractual connection or a previous anchor point, the messenger needed to spend time to distinguish the location, roam the spirit world, and search for the target. This required a certain amount of speed. If it were to deliver the letter, the recipient might not even receive it by the time they die. Klein helplessly thought as he looked at the slowly crawling skeletal creature. He let the smile reappear on his face. After some careful consideration, I think it's best I don't trouble you. Thank you for your willingness. The creature made of illusory white bones stopped. Compared to before, it appeared as though it hadn't moved at all. Klein quickly cancelled the summoning and rubbed his forehead. He was a little depressed and had decided to abandon himself to despair. He decided to use a less troublesome method to find messengers, which was public recruitment, and interview selection. After taking a deep breath, Klein calmed his mind and began the ritual seriously. Looking at the candle flame that was quietly burning, he took a step back and said, I summon in my name, the spirit that wanders about the unfounded, the friendly creature that can be subordinated, a unique being that is willing to be my messenger. Whoosh! The wind blew fiercely inside the wall of spirituality, and Klein's half-top hat almost flew off of his head. The candle flame shook and expanded to the size of a human head. It was so pale that it seemed to have lost its body temperature. A translucent head slowly emerged, as if it had just broken through a thin membrane. Its hair was a light gold color and was smooth. Its eyes were blood red, and it had an imposing appearance. Looks a little familiar. Klein silently muttered. The head had fully shown itself, but what followed wasn't its neck, but an illusory hand that held the end of the head's hair. Behind the palm were complicated patterns, but the color of the cuffs was dark. The summoned spirit world creature appeared at an increasingly rapid speed, and soon, it was before Klein in its entirety. It was indeed a familiar person. It was the headless woman that Klein had met standing at the top of a castle while he was on his way to Calvetua's ruins at the bottom of the sea. She was no longer as large as a castle like she was before. She was now a tall, ordinary woman. Of course, there were still only cuts on her neck and 4 identical heads in her hands. Did you summon me? The headless woman in the complicated black dress stood there quietly. Her 4 drooping heads spoke one after the other in ancient Faesac. She can directly communicate through words. The level of this spirit world creature isn't low. I remember you having a castle. You're already a property owner, so why are you applying for the job of a messenger? Klein sighed with emotion and lampooned. Then, he looked down at the candle behind the headless woman. He was disappointed to find that no other spirit had emerged. He had originally imagined that many spirit world creatures would be willing to be his messenger as they swarmed over, having to form a line to be interviewed. In the end, only one had responded. It should be a problem with the summoning ritual itself. It's considered a relatively simple and basic summoning ceremony, so it's impossible to summon multiple targets at once. Klein looked at the headless lady and solemnly nodded. Yes. Without waiting for the other party to speak, he added another question. Can you roam the spirit world at a relatively fast speed? How good is your survivability? The head which the headless lady lifted answered. Yes. Not bad. As she spoke, she floated upwards and then quickly descended, displaying her speed. Phew. Klein decided to stop making attempts which led to unknown results. He asked in a serious manner, Are you willing to sign a contract and become my messenger? The headless woman's dress fluttered slightly, and her four heads with blonde hair and red eyes nodded at the same time. Yes. Every time. 1 gold coin. A gold coin for each letter sent? Mr. Azik didn't mention that spirit world creatures have such hobbies. Right, he mentioned that when signing a contract, persuasion and communication are key factors. Does this mean that this is a form of persuasion and communication? Klein was surprised and wanted to cancel the summoning immediately. Wait a minute, I might not need to be the one paying for it. Whoever summons the messenger pays for it. Maybe when our communication improves, there would be the option of paying on receipt. After some thought, Klein agreed to the other party's request. Okay. Let's sign the contract. He picked up a dark red round fountain pen and yellowish-brown goatskin parchment that he had prepared earlier, and he quickly wrote down the contract in the language which could stir the forces of nature, ancient Hermes. The format and terms were described in detail in Azik's letter. They were concise and to the point, and they contained clauses such as the messenger not being allowed to look at the letter, not discarding the letter, or endangering the life of the contractor. Of course, if the contents of the letter were related to the messenger had to be informed in advance. In addition to these, Klein added a clause to send 1 gold coin for each letter, specifying that it could be borne by the contractor or by the receiver of the letter. In order to ensure the effectiveness of the contract, the final part used the honorific name of the deity in charge of this domain. It was an undead contract, and normally it meant using Death's honorific name, but Death had long perished with no response from him. Hence, Azik mentioned that it could be replaced by using the description of someone high in the undead domain or the underworld itself, but the binding force wasn't that strong. Without a doubt, Klein chose the underworld, which had a close relationship with the big shot. The home of all death, the hell hidden deep within the spirit world, the witness of the decay of all living things, one that solely belongs to the kingdom of death. After penning these 4 sentences, the yellowish-brown goatskin parchment began to burn with a green flame, illuminating the gloomy surroundings. After he was done with the text, Klein took out Azik's copper whistle, placed it on the goatskin, and wrote his current name, Gehrman Sparrow. This didn't necessarily require a real name, because his aura would enter the contract. The name was only used for summoning, which was to say, using the messenger that belongs to Gehrman Sparrow worked, but the contracted creature of Klein Moretti wouldn't. When Klein finished signing, the goatskin floated up, carrying Azik's copper whistle and the dark red fountain pen, and flew to the headless lady. The headless lady held the head with golden hair and red eyes, let it bite down on the fountain pen and wrote her name, Rionette Tynker. The green flames quickly gathered together, wrapping around Azik's copper whistle and the yellowish-brown goatskin parchment. A few seconds later, the goatskin was reduced to ash, and the copper whistle fell into the palm of Klein's hand. The headless woman, Rionette, collectively blinked with the eyes of her 4 heads, and her body rapidly faded away into the pale candle flame. After the contract was made, Klein no longer needed to undo the summoning. He could do it with his own will. Phew, I finally have a messenger. The spirit that wanders about the unfounded, the friendly creature that can be subordinated, the messenger that belongs to Gehrman Sparrow. Well, when there's an opportunity, I'll get an artisan to create something like the copper whistle, so that I don't have to summon my messenger every time via a ritual. Klein cleared up the mess in a rather good mood. Over the next few days, Byam gradually returned to normal, but Dannett still hadn't been able to receive any telegrams from Admiral of Blood's pirate crew. On Sunday morning, he flipped through the newspaper and suddenly lowered his voice as he said to Klein, "There's a Beyonder gathering tonight. Want to attend?" Chapter 562. Helene Beyonder Gathering? Klein thought for a bit. Then he nodded and responded, "Okay. I should bring forward to the collection of the supplementary ingredients of the Nimble-Right Master Potion. I can also see if I might meet an artisan." He subconsciously started to make arrangements in his mind. Upon seeing Gehrman Sparrow agree, Danitz breathed a quiet sigh of relief, unable to contain his joy. For the past few days, having had his bounty raised significantly, he had obediently stayed in the suite to monitor the radio transceiver. He was so bored that he yearned for the evening to arrive immediately. The Beyonder gathering that Danitz mentioned was at the Amiris Leaf Bar, where pirates, informants, and adventurers were active. It was the first choice if one wanted to gather information and buy supplies. Dressed in a black coat and silk top hat, Klein followed Danitz through the crowded bar's lobby and into a card room. Under the watchful gaze of several bouncers, he gave the predetermined signal and descended down a flight of hidden stairs to a wide underground area. It's like the Evil Dragon Bar in Tinjin City. There's an underground market for herbs, essential oils, ancient books, charms, and all sorts of common mysticism materials. However, the difference is that there are also all sorts of guns and ammunition for sale. Klein even discovered antiquated muskets and lead bullets. They also sell fake identity documents and fake seals. As expected of an overseas colony, their industry is much more developed than Tinjin's. I'll buy a batch of ingredients later to make charms in the Sea God domain. There will always be some discounts if I purchase them in large quantities. Klein slightly turned his head from side to side to take in the situation in the underground area. Next to him, Danitz, who was already doubtful about his own disguise skills, had deliberately put on a cap, keeping the front of his cap down to cover half his face. With great familiarity, he led Klein to the other end of the underground market and knocked on the closed door with 2 long knocks and 4 short knocks. Behind the door, there was only a single candle. It swayed on the lampstand on the side wall, scattering yellow light onto the tiny room. Danitz pointed to the long robes, masks, and other items which were hanging or placed on a table, and said to Klein, "It's up to you to decide whether you would don a disguise. You can also choose not to." Klein looked around, his gaze sweeping past the bouncers in the room. "I don't need it. I am now an informant for the kingdom's military, and the Church of Storms also knows of my identity, so there's nothing for me to be afraid of. If the pirates and adventurers have any malicious thoughts about me because of my lack of a disguise, and if they attempt to attack me, hee." Klein suddenly pictured bounty rewards flying towards him one by one. Danitz curled his lips secretly, picked up a black iron mask, and wore it. Then, he and Klein passed through a dim corridor and into another room under a bouncer's lead. The place was lavishly decorated. The floor was covered with a thick carpet from the southern continent, the walls were decorated with shining lampstands, and the fresh smell of candles could be caught as they suffused with light. Klein glanced around and, without Danitz's help, found a brown leather sofa and sat down on it. He leaned back and crossed his right leg. There were already more than 20 people of various genders gathered here. Some were in hooded robes, while others showed their faces. According to Danitz's description in the morning, not all of the people attending this gathering were Beyonders. There were spokesmen for certain factions, as well as adventurers, pirates, and mysticism enthusiasts who wanted to become Beyonders. Time slowly passed in that quiet environment. About 7 or 8 minutes later, the old man who was sitting on a reclining chair straightened his back and crossed his hands. He chuckled. "Everyone, let's begin." Because he was old, his white hair was sparse, leaving only a thin layer. However, his light brown eyes weren't turbid, with them being bright and sharp. The organizer of the gathering, Strongman Ozeal, a famous pirate in the past, and now the secret boss of the Amiris Leaf Bar. Danitz leaned slightly and introduced the man to Klein with a suppressed voice. He'd actually mentioned it in the morning, but he was afraid that Gehrman Sparrow failed to match a name to the face and would later vent his anger on himself. It's a sorrowful matter to have a secret grasped by others. Danitz sighed inwardly. Klein nodded indiscernibly as he silently watched the transactions happen. There were potion formulas for warrior, sailor, mystery prior, and others, but no one bought them. The expectant sellers were disappointed again and again. Danitz glanced at Gehrman Sparrow, who wore an expressionless face. He then leaned over and explained in a low voice, "There is no notary at this gathering, nor any powerful seer. The authenticity of the potion formula cannot be guaranteed. It's too easy to fake such things, and even if people recognize that the formula is fake, The seller cannot be punished because he might be a victim as well. I know. This is one of the reasons why potion formulas fail to be widely spread. Klein uncrossed his right leg, leaned forward slightly, and said in a voice that was neither loud nor low, I need the remnant spirituality of an ancient wraith. He didn't mention the eyes of a six-winged gargoyle, the spring water from Sonia Island's Golden Spring, or any other supplementary ingredients. He was worried that others would guess that he was a faceless who was preparing to advance to Nimble Right Master. When he was in Tingen, Klein had relied on the purchase of supplementary ingredients to accurately suspect that Dax Turguderian was a prospective spectator, and thus, he figured out his identity as a member of the Psychology Alchemists. It was impossible to deduce any more from the remnant spirituality of an ancient wraith alone, as many of the rituals in the undead domain would use it. Although Klein didn't disguise himself, he still had to be careful. The room was silent for 2 seconds. Then, a slightly hoarse voice sounded. How much do you need? Someone really has it? Klein controlled his expression and didn't let his joy show on his face. He tilted his head to look at the speaker and saw that he was a man in his 30s who was clearly of native blood. The man's skin was bronzed, but he had a dull luster from chronic malnutrition or a lack of light. His face was thin, his cheekbones protruded, and his eyes were sunken, more white than black. A small bottle. Klein pulled out a small metal bottle as an example. The thin, dark man was silent for a moment before saying, 500 pounds. That's reasonable. Klein originally wanted to haggle, but he caught a glimpse of Danet sitting beside him out of the corner of his eye. I'm Gehrman Sparrow, a cold, crazy adventurer. Klein repeated this line 3 times inwardly, quietly took a deep breath, and calmly nodded. Okay. He took out the large stack of cash he had prepared, and he counted out a sum of 500 pounds. The man with the mostly white eyes took out a glass test tube from his pocket, threw it at Klein, and said, all the spirituality will be gone after a year. He wasn't afraid that the other party wouldn't be unable to catch it, because even if it were to break, it wouldn't affect the material itself. It would only be a matter of changing the container. Klein raised his right hand and accurately caught the glass tube. He saw many phosphorescent spots floating in the tube, and when they touched the glass wall, they would strangely expand, forming a face with blurred features that opened to form a mouth that screamed silently. It's real. Klein nodded to himself and handed the thick stack of cash worth 500 pounds to the attendant who approached and handed it to the seller. The trading continued, most of it failing with only a small number succeeding. At the end of the day, the gathering's organizer, Strongman Oziel, laughed and said, I have a request. As he spoke, he pulled out a photo from his inside pocket. The reward for finding the person above is 1,000 pounds or some other common beyond or ingredient of equal value. Remember, do not hurt her. 1,000 pounds? This would make most adventurers go crazy. I wonder who he's looking for, to offer such a high reward. Not surprisingly, Klein saw that everyone present was willing to give it a try. The picture began to be passed in a counterclockwise fashion, and a few minutes later, it was in Klein's hands. As he casually swept a glance over it, a bit of surprise suddenly surfaced in his heart. The woman in the photo was rather pretty, with bright red hair and a pair of green eyes that resembled emeralds. Her skin wasn't fair, but she gave off a healthy feeling. At the time of the photo shoot, she was wearing a long, lake-colored skirt. Her waist was tightened with a flower-shaped ribbon, making her appear exceptionally slender. Although her face seemed to be smiling, her overall appearance was one of displeasure and awkwardness. A girl with a good family background. Who would pay 1,000 pounds to find her? Furthermore, the premise is that she cannot be hurt. A picture of her forcing a smile. Many romance stories with intertwined love and hate flashed in Klein's mind. Stories like a tyrannical pirate falling in love with a wealthy merchant's daughter, abducting her onto his boat before she eventually escaped, or some noble lady from a declining noble family turning into a pirate, and was later caught due to a mistake, only to have a sinful relationship with a mid- or high-ranking mandated punisher or military officer, thus escaping from her predicament and imprisonment. How a newly advanced demoness accidentally fell into a debt of love when giving someone pleasure. Such thoughts flashed through his mind, and Klein almost raised his hand to cover his face. I've read too many novels in my previous life, and I happen to have a trauma because of demonesses in this world. He sighed to himself, looked up at Oziel and asked, What's her name? Helene, Oziel answered succinctly, but she must have switched to using a fake alias. Helene, a typical female Intis name. Klein asked again, is there anything she often wears? Hair is fine too. This was a medium that could be used to seek her with divination. Klein didn't mention things like recently worn clothes that hadn't been washed, afraid that the employer behind the scenes would throw him a piece of lingerie, making it awkward. Oziel shook his head. Nothing. She has a strong anti-tracking ability. What's her strength like? Another member of the gathering asked. Oziel said in a serious manner, the employer didn't give a detailed description. It said that she isn't too strong, but she's stronger than a sequence 9. You don't need to capture her. As long as you determine her whereabouts, you will be paid. Chapter 563, The Fool's Blessing. As long as you can confirm her location, you can receive £1,000. This is the first time I've seen such a mission. On the street outside the Amiris Leaf Bar, Danitz rubbed his hands together with a hint of excitement. He clenched his fists and hit the tall iron-black gas lamppost, yearning to immediately wander around the city and find the red-haired woman named Helene. To him, £1,000 wasn't a small sum. It was enough to add one more house to his line of properties in Byam. It just wouldn't be located in the most prosperous and valuable districts. The elf flying carpet he had previously obtained was only around £2,000 to £3,000, and this was the reward he had gained from fighting dangerous fellows such as Steel Mavati and Blood Brambles Hendry. It was completely incomparable to the easy mission of finding someone. Klein, who was walking ahead, held a package wrapped in newspaper. They were the charm materials which had cost him £15. He slowed his pace a little, glanced at Danitz and spoke without expression. £5,500. Danitz's excitement froze on his face. Only then did he remember an important problem. In the eyes of the other pirates and adventurers, he was as attractive as red-haired Helene. They didn't need to fight him. Once they recognized him, they could report his identity to the military, the church, or the police, and they would receive a reward worth more than £1,000. After all, he was already a great pirate worth £5,500. Searching for red-haired Helene would be equivalent to a lady with a nice figure and good looks entering the Red Theater for entertainment. Dog shit. Danitz spat out a single word, his face grim, as he stretched out the middle consonant. At the same time, he automatically pulled down his cap even lower. Klein, who had poured cold water on Danitz, resumed his normal walking speed and considered the question of finding the red-haired Helene. The lack of a medium and the necessary information had made it difficult for him to use divination, so he had to consider other methods. Activate my underlings to do an investigation of the entire city? This is something that can only be done by the church, the military, and the police. Even the local gangs would find it difficult to accomplish. Wait, I think I can. I'm not sea god Calvetua. My believers are all across Byam and Blue Mountain Island. I just need to make an announcement, no, a revelation to all my believers, and I can get them to search for red-haired Helene. But would this damage my standing? To do something like that for £1,000, even a god wants some face. If I were the real sea god, I wouldn't care about this. However, I'm now acting as Calvetua. I have to maintain the dignity of a god as best as I can. Back when Calvetua was on the verge of collapse, it didn't even broadcast a revelation when it was urgently trying to find Letitia and her subordinates. Instead, it only gave orders to his worshippers in the upper echelons. I can change its commandments as part of reconstructing an image, but I can't appear too low class. Well, that should also be a requirement of true acting. It would be difficult to organize an investigation just by giving Kalat, Edmonton, and the others a revelation. Furthermore, they would definitely magnify the severity of the issue and cause a huge commotion. It would only make things more difficult to deal with later. There's another solution. I can throw the radio transceiver above the gray fog and attempt to contact the magic mirror, a Rhodes. I'll ask him about red-haired Helene's location. I have to be careful about this. I need to prepare ahead of time and confirm it via divination. I don't want to receive strange telegrams from the true creator or the primordial Demonis. Even a glance at it would probably make me go mad. Having quickly come up with ideas, Klein boarded a rental carriage parked at the corner of the street. Danitz pressed his cap and followed closely behind. Returning to the Wind of Azure Inn, Klein took off his hat and coat while saying to Danitz, "If your captain contacts you through a dream, ask for information about red-haired Helene. She probably doesn't know.
Otherwise, I would have known this red-haired Helene.
Danitz grinned. I don't know who's looking for her, to be willing to pay £1,000. His thoughts were whirling, imagining a love story akin to the ones Emperor Roselle had penned. Klein glanced at him and casually mentioned, I'll do the monitoring tonight. You're doing it? Danitz snapped out of his fantasies, wondering if he had heard wrongly. Yes. Klein nodded. Gehrman Sparrow realizes that I'm too exhausted? Although this fellow is a little crazy, he's still a good person at heart. He had actually decided to risk his life to save those people when we were at Bansi Harbor for reasons that couldn't be considered good. Danitz sighed to himself. Carrying the radio transceiver and its relevant parts, Klein went into the bedroom, locked the door, and threw them above the grey fog with a sacrificial ritual. After doing all of this, he was in no hurry to leave the towering palace. He waved his hand, and the sea god's scepter flew out from the junk pile. He scanned through the prayers of different people and gathered experience on how people had multiple facades. In the process, he would occasionally respond, like a child who still had great interest in a new toy. As Klein's browsing drew to a close, ripples of light began to form around the seat of the fool. Someone is praying to me, to the fool and not to see God. Klein raised his eyebrows and emanated his spirituality, scanning the scene within the rippling light. En Mat Haba, in a room with closed curtains. Dressed in a classic black robe, Ed Sheeran resisted the impulse in his heart and said to the sweet young girl Denise, The gift of God is in our bodies, but if we want to obtain it, we must have a teacher guide it out. Your soul is pure and beloved by the gods. I will personally guide you. In the process, no matter what happens, you must trust me and listen to me. Before that, do you have any questions? Ed Sheeran was a swindler. His specialty was to establish a cult to cheat others for money and sex. He would then decisively flee before it reached a certain scale that would garner attention from the police. This time, he had come from Backland, disguised as one of the fools blessed that many gangsters in the capital were looking for. He had also developed a batch of believers in his target group. He falsely claimed that the fool was the incarnation of the Lord of the Storms and that he would come to save the faithful during the apocalypse. This was a secret that could not be widely publicized and could only be spread in secret. Otherwise, it would attract the attention of the gods of the other churches. Only those who were chosen would be able to believe in the fool in advance and be the first batch of the redeemed. To make himself appear more persuasive, he spent a lot of money in Backland, buying a piece of paper with the honorific name of the fool written on it. As for what was on the piece of paper, his comment was, It looks like it's real. Denise asked with both fear and anticipation, Lord Adorer, why didn't we get a response when we read the honorific name of God? Aren't we blessed who have been selected and should bathe in God's grace? I'll immediately give you God's grace. Ed Sheeran took a deep breath and suppressed the tantalizing images in his mind. 2 reasons. First, you haven't discovered the grace of God which is hidden in your body. I will help you complete that later. Second, you are not devout enough. Don't argue, I can see right through you. After you do all of this, you will be able to recite the honorific name of God and receive a response, just like me. Under Denise's idolizing and curious gaze, Ed Sheeran picked up a pen on the table beside her and scribbled a line of words. It was the Hermes language used for a sacrificial offering. In order to make the scam a success, Ed Sheeran had acquired a lot of religious knowledge and even went to a university's Department of History to sit in on archaeology courses. Holding the paper in front of Denise, he proudly recited the words he had written in Hermes. The fool that doesn't belong to this era. The mysterious ruler above the grey fog. The king of yellow and black who wields good luck. Following that with half-closed eyes and open arms, he said dreamily, I feel the blessings of God. At this moment, a streak of silver lightning descended from the sky and landed right on Ed Sheeran's head. With a sizzling sound, the tiny electric bolt snaking across his body scurried. With God's blessing, he fell to the ground and his body quickly charred while his muscles twitched violently. After a few seconds, he stopped all movement, including breathing as Denise exclaimed, Lord Ed Sheeran is indeed God's blessed. Denise finally sensed that something wasn't right. She stepped forward carefully, lifted her skirt and knelt down, placing her finger to the tip of Ed Sheeran's nose. He's dead. He's dead. Denise jerked back and fell to the ground in terror. She burst into tears and stumbled out of the room, heading for the nearby police station. Atop the grey fog, Klein silently retracted the sea god's scepter. You actually dared to use my name to cheat others of their wealth and sully women. The corner of his mouth twitched, wishing he could give another bolt of lightning to that man named Ed Sheeran. This was called a corpse mutilation. The girl would probably call the police, right? This kind of case would inevitably be referred to a corresponding Beyonder team. I wonder if it will be the Nighthawks, the mandated punishers, or the machinery hive mind. After what Mr. A has done, my reputation as the fool isn't small in Backlund. Perhaps I already have a dossier in the official organizations. Well, maybe they'll put everything together and hand it over to the Red Gloves or something similar for handling. Klein's past identity and insight as a Nighthawk had allowed him to consider the possible future developments. However, he quickly put this matter to the back of his mind, because no matter what, they wouldn't be able to detect that it was him. Klein threw the sea god's scepter back into the junk pile, ready to return to the real world.
Suddenly, one of the dark red stars that were quietly floating in the boundless gray fog had lit up all of a sudden, emitting a light that was as bright as water.
It swelled and shrunk repeatedly in an abnormally conspicuous manner. This was a crimson star that didn't belong to any member of the Tarot Club. What a busy day today. Who could it be? Like Miss Justice, Mr. Hanged Man, and Little Sun, someone is relying on a certain object to connect with the gray fog? Klein's spirituality spread out as he thought. He didn't respond and only observed. Chapter 564. Knowledge Pursuer. As Klein's spirituality made contact, the constantly expanding and contracting crimson star presented the images and sounds contained within. A black-haired woman in a classical robe had fallen to the ground, writhing in pain. She held an ordinary-looking celestial globe in one hand, and in the other, she held a short scepter that wasn't even the length of a small arm. Her strong will to survive almost broke through the binding of the crimson stars and directly entered Klein's ears. Like Justice and the Sun, this woman's figure appeared rather blurry, making it difficult to discern her exact appearance. But there were some things Klein could clearly see, such as her facial features, such as her splitting cheek muscles and the flesh inside that was contracting into eyeballs. Other features included her ears stretching outwards like a trumpet, or her fingers which were scratching at the floor to create bright streaks of blood, as well as a pair of cold, lashless eyes that were almost transparent and were situated above her. The black-haired girl's mutation didn't decline. Her body was tenaciously healing itself, causing the flesh and blood which resembled an eyeball to melt away. Her ruptured muscles fused together, and her extended ears shrunk inward. Every detail was in a repetitive seesaw-like struggle between the two states. Klein was dazzled by the illusory, lashless eyes. It was as if he had returned to Tingen, back to the time when he had first mastered spirit vision. Back then, he had seen a pair of eyes like that on old Neil's back. Hidden sage?
Klein leaned back in his chair, stretched out his hand, and took hold of the sea god's scepter that once again flew out of the junk pile. He planned to lend a helping hand and smite those evil eyes with a few bolts of lightning. However, after careful examination, he sharply realized that the black-haired woman's abnormality had stemmed from the crazy ravings that no one else could hear. This was because the source of everything was in her ears, deep within her spirit body, her soul body. It's very similar to the situation when Miss Magician suffers from the ravings of the full moon. Fortunately, I'm experienced. Otherwise, I would have given the wrong response. Klein thought for a moment and thought of a way to save her. It was to pull her spirit body above the gray fog and directly block out the crazy ravings. As long as the source of the power was gone, the mutation would be quickly dealt with by the lady's self-recovery powers. As for whether she was worth saving, or if she harbored malicious intentions, the current him was no longer as troubled as he was in the past. If the black-haired lady had committed a heinous crime to a certain degree, and had already established a connection with the mysterious space above the gray fog through the crimson star, Klein could give her a few lightning bolts at any time and let her be thrown back to where she belonged. If she really has any kind of malicious intentions, or if she causes any accidents, I, who possess the Sea God Scepter, the Dark Emperor card, and am capable of using the gray fog's power to some degree, wouldn't lack the ability to resist. Klein held onto the white bone scepter in his right hand and pointed at the remote star. His spirit energy surged and poured into the crimson-red light that was like flowing water. This time, he was able to establish the mysterious and stable connection with ease. The black-haired lady's figure instantly appeared at the side of the long bronze table, sitting on a chair that didn't belong to any of the current members of the Tarot Club. As for Klein, he He could see from the final image of the crimson stars that the mutation on her body had weakened significantly. He nodded indiscernibly, patiently waiting for the other party to speak. The black-haired lady was still somewhat adrift. 1 second, she was struggling in extreme pain, with her vision gradually turning black, and the next second, she was inside a towering domed palace. Beneath her was an endless and silent gray fog that extended outwards endlessly. How couldn't she be taken aback? After a brief moment of silence, she turned her gaze to the figure leisurely sitting at the very end of the mottled long table. She asked with an ethereal voice, "Is this the underworld?" "You aren't dead." Klein laughed. At this moment, he saw that the symbol tainted with starlight quickly changed on the back of the black-haired lady's high-back chair, forming a pair of eyes that contained countless resplendent stars. They were cold and indifferent, and they lacked eyelashes. Based on his past experiences, he believed that this was a symbol representing the mystery prior pathway. The black-haired lady froze, gradually regaining her senses. Instinctively, she scanned her surroundings before finally casting her gaze at the mysterious man shrouded behind the gray fog. White shirt, tailcoat, no tie, black pants, bright leather boots, seemingly black hair, and a blurry appearance. There's nothing strange about this. He casually holds a milky white scepter that's slightly longer than an arm in his hand, and that scepter. The black-haired lady's pupils contracted as the depths of her eyes reflected, in its entirety, the blue gemstones, and the aura of a storm from the surroundings that it stirred. Furthermore, there were countless points of light that surrounded it, giving it a holy and majestic feeling. It's a scepter at the demigod level. He's playing with it like it's a toy. He doesn't care about it at all. The lady in black narrowed her eyes and cautiously asked, "How may I address you?" He wasn't sure that the pair of eyes belonged to the hidden sage, so he used a vague term, "that guy," instead, so that, no matter what, the fool was absolutely correct and upheld his standing. After a moment of silence, Katlia said, "No, I didn't provoke him." She paused, then she continued, "The members of the Moses ascetic order believe that all objects are numeric, and we pursue knowledge itself. However, Emperor Roselle once said that we aren't pursuing knowledge, but that knowledge is pursuing us. The hidden sage is an embodiment of knowledge itself. He is chasing us, every single Moses ascetic order member. When too much knowledge is injected into us, without us being able to quickly digest and master it, a situation like before would happen. Either I lower my defenses and open my mind to accept the modifications from the hidden sage, or I would tenaciously resist it or end up losing control. If that's the case, you aren't specifically targeted by the hidden sage. Even if you managed to escape from the previous predicament, you wouldn't be suspected of anything. According to what you said, you are very knowledgeable. Back then, old Neil only wanted to obtain the knowledge of human body refining and of a perfect revival." Klein suddenly sighed, but he didn't show it on his face. The reputation of Admiral of Stars isn't too bad. She's the kind of pirate with a code of honor. Klein stopped his thoughts and calmly said, "If something similar happens again, you can recite my name." "Recite your name." Katlia's lips quivered, instinctively wanting to refuse. In the end, she didn't say anything as she fell silent for a long time. After repeatedly weighing the pros and cons, she stood up, crossed her arms in front of her chest, and slightly bowed as she said, "How may I be of service?" Klein laughed and said in an indifferent tone, "In the future, provide some assistance to my blessed." "By your will." Katlia sat down again and asked cautiously, "Is the honorific name provided by Mr. Z yours?" She then repeated the honorific name of the fool to him. Klein nodded his head, indicating that she was right. Katlia looked at the other empty seats and asked after some deliberation, "Honorable Mr. Fool, will there be others here as well?" Klein laughed and replied, "People like yourself. They set up a regular gathering, and I bear witness." After a few seconds of silence, Katlia asked, "Can I participate?" She thought that since she wasn't connected with the mysterious existence known as the Fool, it was better to know more than to do nothing. "Of course you have money, knowledge, influence, and needs." Klein casually leaned against the back of the chair. "Sure. Without my permission, you are not to leak this matter." "All right," Katlia answered without hesitation. Klein tapped his left index finger and revealed the rest of the tarot cards on the bronze table. They used tarot cards as their code names. "These are the remaining ones. Pick one." Katlia scanned the cards and immediately said, "The Hermit." Chapter 565. Eye of Mystery. Prying inside the captain's cabin, Katlia slowly got up from the floor and walked in silence to the full-length mirror next to the bookcase. In the mirror, the skin on her face was fair and smooth, without a single crack. Her ears were small and normal, showing no signs of expanding. Her deep purple eyes were calm, as if nothing had happened. However, she could see more with her eyes that carried a sense of mystery. Hidden beneath her skin were eye-like flesh and blood that hadn't fully dissolved. Her soul body, whose pain and madness were rapidly dispersing. Innumerable illusory objects with ineffable forms that roamed about. Sailors who were cleaning the deck several rooms away. Everything within a range of a few dozen meters was revealed to her in an unobscured but unusually chaotic manner. From the day she had become a Sequence 5 Constellations Master, her mystery prior powers had been greatly enhanced. She could faintly see that there were thick curtains around her that resembled shadows, and behind the curtains, something seemed to be watching her and all living beings. There are no traces of being influenced by Mr. Fool, which in turn explains many things. He was able to directly pull my soul body into that mysterious space with a strange tyrannical and secretive power. It's not something that a demigod scepter can compare to. Although he was dressed in contemporary clothing, this doesn't mean anything. For an existence at this level, it's very easy for different people to see him in different forms, and his true appearance would probably cause every person that sees him directly to lose control and die. Katlia stared at herself in the mirror, thinking silently about what had just happened. It was inevitable that she had some predictions about Mr. Fool's identity, but this was only guesswork without any evidence. The fact that he is wearing a tailcoat doesn't mean that he is very young or that he was born recently. Perhaps his essence is ancient, even older than the 7 gods. The knowledge that is pursuing me tells me that before the cataclysm, there were indeed older gods, and he might be one of them, Katlia said silently to herself before turning away from the full-length mirror and walking back to the place where she had struggled in pain. She picked up her glasses that had fallen to the side. She put the thick glasses on her nose, hiding her deep purple eyes. Everything that didn't appear under a normal person's vision quickly disappeared from her sight. Katlia stood there, thinking again about the influence Mr. Fool and the so-called Tarot Club would have on her. Unknowingly, a tall figure surfaced in her mind. The words that she would never forget had once again echoed in her ears. "Leave. Your destiny doesn't lie with me." "Is this my destiny, Your Majesty?" She closed her eyes. They were in charge of the investigations, but there were no leads, and they didn't put much emphasis on it because they had other missions on hand. The Fool has powers in the lightning domain? Leonard Mitchell removed the black hat from his face. Who knows? If he's the embodiment of some old friend of ours, it's possible to do something similar by preparing a corresponding mystical item. It's not without precedent. This is especially so for the fake gods in the southern continent and the colonial islands. Holy Lord of Storms. Those cheats claim that the Fool is another manifestation of the Lord of Storms. This might also be why he was smitten to death. Soest leisurely threw the telegraph aside. Leonard glanced at it, lowered his feet, half-turned, and chuckled. Aren't we going to perform some investigations? How? Are you going to feign ignorance and recite his honorific name? Soest sneered. This has a high probability of catching the tail of the Fool, but I will basically be bidding farewell to this world. My digestion of the nightmare potion has been going pretty well, and I just got another good item. There are still plenty of sequences up ahead which are waiting for me. How can I enter into an eternal sleep so soon? Leonard stroked his drooping hair strands and said, "We can get a few criminals on death row to give it a try?" But he could just as easily not respond. Soest shook his head. "We can start from the 2 cases that involve the tarot rituals. I'm more and more convinced that it has something to do with the Fool. Firstly, the Fool is one of the major arcana tarot cards. Secondly, the organization that is seeking or cracking down on his blessed is the Aurora Order. And the first case that involved the tarot ritual is the Lenivis case. As such, the Aurora Order's attempt to allow the true creator's descent was foiled." Lenivis pulled at his black vest and got up. Soest thought about it seriously and said, "The clues from the other cases happen to have been cut off as well. For now, we have nothing else to do. You can try to investigate the 2 tarot ritual cases." "Sure."
Leonard smiled back. This was exactly what he wanted.
With a case that no one cared about being handed to him, he had won a certain amount of time to act freely.
At 2:50 p.m. Furs returned from the cold streets to her residence while trembling. It wasn't that she wanted to go out in this damp, cold weather, but it was that she had run out of food at home. As for Zio, she had gone all the way to Pritz Harbor to capture a fugitive and collect the bounty. It was unknown when she would be able to return home. She's always instinctively chasing after and capturing fugitives. It can be said that she has been acting in some way. Holding the large brown paper bag in her arms, she habitually fished for her keys to open the mailbox and take out the letters and bills. Although she couldn't truly see through the blurry concealment of the fog, she could still make out the details of their clothing. The hanged man, a man in his prime, in his 30s, and has messy hair like seaweed with a rare deep blue color. This is a common mutation seen in the sailor pathway. He's wearing a robe with the patterns of storms and waves. Someone from the Church of Storms? Katlia's pupils contracted. She didn't show any abnormalities as she continued to observe the rest of the members. The son, a young male, perhaps still underage. His attire is rare and has a simple ancient sense of beauty. It's very tight, making it suitable for combat. Is he a beyonder in this aspect? The world. Neither an old man nor a young man. He has a gloomy temperament and wears a hooded robe. He has a feeling as though he's not a living person. Is this something similar to Senor or Steel Mavedi? Or some other sequence I'm unaware of? The magician, a young woman, wears a common lone-style dress. Apart from having a trait of languidness, she doesn't have any other characteristics. This kind of person is the easiest to ignore, so she needs to have more attention paid to her. The moon, a young man. He sits very casually. Black hair, red eyes, and wears an Earth Mother priest robe. There seems to be only one possibility for such a combination. A vampire. As expected, the members of Mr. Fool's Tarot Club aren't that simple. Just a preliminary judgment involves two churches. Katlia withdrew her gaze and met Audrey's gaze.
Sensing the other party's intention to ask, she nodded lightly. The hermit.
Katlia had spoken in ancient Faisak, deliberately avoiding the more familiar languages of Intis and Lone, as she had done so back when she was communicating with Mr. Fool. And she had noticed one thing. Mr. Fool had previously told her that the time the gathering was being held was at 3 p.m. on Monday, Backlund time. Does this mean that the members of this gathering are currently predominantly made up of people from Lone? Katlia made her own judgment. Justice. Audrey smiled faintly in return.
Good afternoon, ma'am hermit. She had noticed what the hermit had been up to and had summarized the person's traits in her heart.
She's a very cautious woman who has rich experience in the beyonder world. She's quiet but not introverted, and she's very confident in her observation skills or certain abilities related to her eyes. Furthermore, her clothing style and the short scepter hanging at her waist indicates that her sequence pathway leans towards mystery. This requires confirmation. Perhaps it's just a hobby. At the same time, Katlia also managed to clearly make out Miss Justice's clothing. She wears 2 hanging earrings, and the earrings are small and exquisite, inlaid with very high-quality emeralds which accentuate her emerald green eyes. They're obviously worth a lot. The necklace around her neck looks unique. It's lined with diamonds that are quite difficult to count, but it's nothing ostentatious. Her milky white dress is simple yet beautiful. It's tailored to be elegant and befitting of her status, like the work of a stylish designer. As she went through the details, Katlia couldn't help but close her eyes. A 17 to 18-year-old girl. Very rich. The way she moves and her etiquette makes her highly suspect to be a noble with high status. A lone noble? Katlia didn't know why she sighed in her heart. After a round of greetings from Audrey, there was no need for Klein to introduce the original members of the Tarot Club to the hermit or the hermit to the rest. Just as she sat down, Audrey once again turned to the very end of the long bronze table. Mr. Fool, I'm out of town and have only managed to find 1 page of Roselle's diary. At the last gathering, she had provided 2 pages, so she was 2 pages short of paying off the debt. However, with her being in the manor, even if she often went to the city, all she managed was to collect 1 diary page. In addition, due to the addition of the new member, Hermit,
She was careful not to mention the psychology alchemists. She didn't mention Backland or East Chester County at all.
Roselle's diary. Diary?
Katlia almost lost control and couldn't help quickly turning her head to look at Miss Justice, who sat on the same side as her. She clearly remembered that the tall and beautiful figure had once sighed.
It's not a notebook. It's his diary.
However, other than him, no one else would be able to understand it. The members of the Tarot Club know that Roselle's notebook is a diary?
Mr. Fool is collecting Roselle's diary?
Is he trying to crack it to find the secret hidden in that part of history? This is more like a revived ancient god. All sorts of confused and shocked thoughts surfaced in Katlia's mind. She maintained her staidness, just turning her head in a normal fashion to observe the first transaction. After experiencing many things and trudging her way towards becoming one of the 7 great pirate admirals, she understood that the most important thing for her to do after joining the Tarot Club was to listen more and speak less.
Mr. Fool, I received 3 pages, Fur said with a smile. They had been mailed by Dorian Gray.
At last week's gathering, as she hadn't received her teacher's response, and due to the cold weather, she hadn't attended any Beyonder gatherings, so she couldn't provide a single page. Derek followed immediately. Mr. Fool, I've copied a new legend of the ancient gods.
TSK, he's always using the legends of ancient gods as a perfunctory payment.
Emlyn glanced contemptuously at the sun suddenly. He thought of something. Although the sun claimed that the one they worshipped was the Lord that created everything, he had never tried to cover up the influence that Giant King, Ormer, had on them. However, he had never mentioned that Giant Queen Omabella was who the Kingdom of Silver originally believed in. Could it be that the City of Silver isn't equal to the Kingdom of Silver?
I'll wait a minute and try it out.
Emlyn had never been able to get over the sun's earlier slandering of the Sanguine. For pages of Roselle's diary, a legend of the ancient gods. That's pretty good. I wonder if it contains information about the High Elf, Kohainum. Alas, after Mr. Hanged Man learned that the world is a blessed, I cannot make the world ask questions without any qualms. Klein thought quickly and said with a chuckle, very good. He helped Miss Justice, Miss Magician, and Little Sun conjure their respective content, which flashed into the palm of his hand as he casually browsed through them.
Mr. Fool doesn't seem to be deciphering it.
He can read Emperor Roselle's diary? What's his background? What is his true identity? A sense of indescribable terror and dread suddenly welled up in Katlia's heart. She quickly retracted her gaze and looked at the long bronze table, as if she was memorizing the simple patterns on the table's surface. The reaction the hermit showed when realizing that Mr. Fool is able to read Roselle's diary exceeded my imagination. Is she concerned with this matter, or is it somehow related to her? Audrey pursed her lips thoughtfully. Although the other party hit it quickly and naturally, this was still obvious enough for a sequence 7 from the spectator pathway. Klein sensed the abnormality of the new member, the hermit, because he also wanted to see how this member of the Moses ascetic order, who had a great deal of knowledge, would react to it.
The result left him surprised. Isn't that a little too intense?
Klein didn't have the luxury of time to think about it as his gaze fell to the first page of Roselle's diary. You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.